Welcome to our Monday morning podcast called What's Working. This is a podcast where we discuss what's working in various churches. We're interviewing different preachers, different Christians from around the country, around the world, and talking about what's working evangelistically in their congregation by using technology, by using marketing, kind of the marriage of those two. And today we have somebody who I also know really, really well, unfortunately. It's a guy named Shane Millard who preaches for the North Hixson Church of Christ in Tennessee. You may be familiar with him because he was actually one of our speakers on our virtual Bible summit that we did a few weeks ago. I guess it's probably been about a month ago right now. But he, I think, went in the afternoon hour. And as I mentioned then, I've known Shane for a long time. Shane was actually the guy who got me into preaching in the first place. We do not have to talk about that story right now at all, Shane. I know you're itching to say that. We'll save that for some future podcast later after people have already formed an opinion about us. But Shane was the one who got me started preaching. I met Shane when I went down to school in Nacogdoches in Deep East, Texas. And so I've known Shane for a long time, worked with Shane. He actually preached in Greenville for a few years at the church across town. So we've crossed paths quite a bit. And I've been looking forward to have him on the podcast because I know that he's been doing, since this whole coronavirus thing started, has been doing some interesting things with Zoom. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, is about how you can use technology and webinar software to kind of integrate within your local churches, especially within small groups. And you can use it for virtual Bible studies. He's going to talk about virtual reading groups. So that's what we're going to discuss today and go into depth on how you can use that in your local congregation. But Shane, first go ahead and just talk about who you are, where you came from, how you got started preaching, what your blood type is, your favorite flavor of soda, all the different things, that people care about.
Oh, man. So I'm 33 years old. I preach, obviously, in the North Hixson Church here. Nobody knows where Hixson is. It's a suburb of Chattanooga. So most people know where Chattanooga is. There's pretty much only one of those. So I've been preaching since, I think I did my first sermon when I was 16. So I've been doing that for a while. And then I've been here with this church. It'll be 2 years in May. So,
has it only been 2 years? It feels like it's been a lot longer than that.
Yeah.
No, I don't mean that in a negative way. You left Greenville, I guess, 3 or 4 years ago. And so, or no, it's been 6 years since you left Greenville. I don't know.
So I left Greenville in August of 2014.
Yeah. We both had kids around that same time, so those years are kind of running together. It seems like every month is the same. But yeah, that's good. Yeah, you're a native born Texan, so moving out to Tennessee is quite a shift for you. But
it is. Ironically, if I took you outside though, you'd think that you were in sections of East Texas. So just the way East Texas is compared to a lot of the other parts of Texas, it has a lot of similarities. But this is a beautiful place. It's called the Scenic City, so it's really nice. We're really enjoying it, and so a really good work here. I really enjoy being here, and so let's see. Yeah, so we've been friends for good grief. Do we want to talk about how long we've known each other?
No, we'll just say it was been greater than 10 years. We'll talk about how our friendship started, and we can just talk about the fact that you wouldn't leave me alone. I remember one night when I was in my dorm and it was like 9:00 and you texted me and you said, "Hey, do you want to hang out?" And I said, "No." And you said, "Too bad, I'm coming over anyways." So that you kind of jammed that relationship together somehow. But I'm glad you did, because it's been a very fruitful relationship. We've also gone overseas together. We went to the Philippines together in 2009 and worked over there, and that's where we met quite a few people there. And you went before then. I went after there, but we didn't go. We only went one time together, but it was a good experience. The one thing that I've always really liked about you is, and this is the rare moment where I'm giving you a compliment. And by the way, for anybody who's wondering why I'm riffing on Shane so hard, Shane is one of my best friends. He was in my wedding, so I'm allowed to do this.
You were in my wedding too.
I was in his wedding. We're allowed to do this. This is not just me being mean. But Shane, I think one of the things I like about you is that you're always open to trying new ideas and always open to doing new things evangelistically. Of course, it sounds redundant or it sounds silly to say that about being a preacher, but you really genuinely, legitimately care about reaching the lost. And I know in this time with the coronavirus, there's been a lot of people that have kind of used it as, I don't want to say to kind of take time off, but in the face of what's going on, it's kind of easy to just kind of sit back and say, well, I'm not going to do a whole lot. But there have also been a lot of Christians, and you're one of them, and we're inspired every day by seeing these people on Facebook. There's been a lot of people that have used it as an opportunity to grow and to say, okay, what can we do to bring the gospel to these people? How can we spread it in different means? And I think that's on highlight right now with coronavirus, but that's kind of been who you are just in general. You've always been the kind of guy that really strives to teach the gospel no matter where you are to everybody, and that's something I've always respected about you.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. It's been one of those things that from a very young age, I guess I got caught in this inconsistency of saying, hey, if we actually believe the Bible is true and we believe what the Bible says, then why aren't we having people, why aren't we acting in consistent ways with what the Bible says? Right. And so that's kind of the extension of it. But yeah, I think for just my general attitude is I'm open to whatever works and open to ideas. Just in general, I like being one of those people that like even listening to a dissenting opinion or listening to some other way or approach or something like that. Yeah. I may not completely agree with it, but there's always some nugget that I can get in it. In fact, actually, I think one reason for this is years ago, you recommended Dale Carnegie to me. And so he really mentions that in How to Stop Worrying and Start Living. And I think also in How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Yeah, How to Win Friends and Influence People I recommended to you not because of preaching, just because I felt like you needed it in your life at that point. But
I did.
We all need it. Dale Carnegie's a great read. I needed it too.
But his whole idea though is about making sure that you're open to criticism and different ways of approaching things.
Yeah.
There's this one guy that I've listened to and everything, and he said the hardest climate to change is the climate of the human mind.
Yeah.
And there's all kinds of different concerns and everything, and it's the battle that we fight between our own ears is the hardest battle.
Yeah.
And that's what it comes down to.
Yeah.
And I think even with what you were talking about getting kind of stuck in kind of a holding pattern before you want to try to use these different mechanisms, that's kind of how I felt with one example is with Meetup. I was thinking, okay, Meetup is only in person, right? And yet I had a conversation with a friend of mine recently, and he's been using his Meetup. Like Meetup apparently changed their rules where they can use Zoom in it now. And he's been using that a lot to reach out. And so tonight I'm actually trying to get my Meetup started back up. And just one example of that. So when I have a reoccurring meeting and that kind of thing, I'll get a first timer. I've had maybe 2 or 3. Well, I've had a handful of first timers, but it's been kind of sporadic, right? Yeah. So I'd have maybe 1, maybe a couple, 3 at the most. Tonight I have 4 first timers.
Yeah. Wow.
Already set up to come to tonight.
Yeah.
And I think that's just a statement of the times that people are open to looking at things. They have more time. Maybe people are really concerned. Maybe they lost a loved one tragically, but they're thinking, what does the Bible say? I need to actually know something. And mine is actually on Genesis. So I've kind of I started at the beginning of the year, but it's kind of like, hey, why don't you have this go along with your daily readings and that kind of thing? Or maybe you don't know what the Bible is about. You can start something like this, because I think Genesis 1:33 is probably the most important section of scripture to understand what the Bible is going to be about.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's the foundation for everything. So if you don't understand that relationship between God and man and God and creation, then everything else kind of doesn't really make sense. I guess you can jump around quite a bit, but you always have to go back to get that foundation. Not to say that you should just scrap everything, but yeah. So you mentioned Meetup, and I've heard people talk about that. I knew people had used for a long time Google Groups. Google Groups really isn't in vogue anymore. I think Google may have even shut it down. I can't remember.
Yeah, I think it's called Hangouts now.
Yeah, Google Hangouts.
So,
I think that's still around, but Google has shut down various parts of it. I know Google Plus isn't nearly as popular as it used to be. So it is. I mean, you do see kind of the transitions in software where they're changing and adapting to the times. And it's not surprising that something like Meetup would allow for Zoom. My understanding of Meetup is that it's always more local, that it's geographic specific, that it's only people in your immediate area. Like I saw people that would say, "Hey, we're meeting at Chick-fil-A tonight to study," which Chick-fil-A is the official sponsor of Bible studies everywhere. But we're meeting at Chick-fil-A to study through the book of Romans, and they put it up on Meetup, and then people from the community can go on and find it. Is that how kind of you constructed it too, or is it invite only, or how do you do something like that?
So that's what snagged me initially. So
Okay.
Meetup, the whole point of it is to meet up, right?
Right.
I mean, that's
Very descriptive name.
Very definition and name of the whatever.
A plus for branding.
Yeah. So I was thinking, oh, okay. Like when the virus stuff hit, I'm thinking, okay, my Meetup is pretty much shelved because we can't meet up. But that's what this conversation kind of led to. It's like, oh, like you can use Zoom, and you go on the Meetup's website. They actually give you different sources or different ways of having these online meetups. And so if you are interested in doing a meetup, we had ours once a week. We had ours we had it at Starbucks, then moved to Panera for sake of room. And we were having, dude, it really was frustrating that the virus kicked in, because we were having a really good group, like every week, man, and just having a lot of people and that kind of thing. And so all of that kind of hit the stall. But what Meetup has done is they've allowed you to use Zoom to go about that. And so what we've done, the church here was really good about that. They set up an actual Bible study group. It's called Chattanooga Bible Study, and you pay for an account on that, but then you can go through and have people basically kind of join your group. And so it sends out emails to say, hey, we're starting a new group, or we're starting, whatever. And so that's what this was. All I did was restart the group, send an email out to everybody, and then had like 4 different people that are first timers that are talking about being there tonight. We'll see how it goes, but I know, talking to my friend though, he has had people that he wasn't getting before. And you'd think, wow, I can't even use this tool. And yet it's actually quite the opposite, is that it can be more effective now than it was even before. So again, that's the climate of the human mind, right? I kind of caught myself thinking, oh, this is the only way this works. But things change so fast, especially in technology. It just is really, really tough.
Yeah, and that's that's something we see with worship services, because we think about worship services being local. And don't get me wrong, when I say that, I don't mean that we need to abandon the local worship service at all. That's not by any stretch of the imagination. But in a situation, because I know Tennessee is different than Texas, and apparently not a lot of ways. I think probably Tennessee is kind of our long lost cousin. At least that's
there's so much interchange between people and places and stuff. So
it's very similar. We're divided by Mississippi and Arkansas. But anyways, I know Tennessee is different in that they have different restrictions on stuff. Texas has always maintained that you can still worship in a church building, because our governor deemed it as essential services. So you can still meet as long as you meet along to the CDC guidelines. We were talking about beforehand, that's not really an option, at least with us, and it's not with y'all either, because our building, we can barely fit everybody in there as well, which is a great problem to have. But you have to think about church, you have to think about gatherings in a little bit different way. And last week when we talked to Kyle Campbell, we talked about how he's doing, every single, I think 7 or 8 different services of 9 or 10 people a piece. That's one way to do it. Other people are doing virtual services. You're doing Zoom worship services, which is what I want to talk about here in just a minute. But you have to think outside the box, and you have to think of things. How can we do scriptural things in these different circumstances? And I think that's exactly right. I think that totally applies when you talk about these meetups, because when you talk about evangelism, you used to be able to just walk up and knock on somebody's front door. I actually remember either being there or you telling me a story about how you knocked on somebody's door and I think you had a gun shoved in your face, or you were yelled at or something. It was very aggressive.
That was together. I was in it was one of the churches we were working with, and I went up there and I knocked on the guy's door instead of hitting the doorbell. And so he came to the door and was like, hey, don't you see the doorbell, man? And I was away from our group a little bit, and it was loud enough that they heard me all the way down the rest of the cul-de-sac or whatever. the rest of the neighborhood. And anyway, it became kind of a running joke, but it was a
Yeah.
kind of a whoa. Of course,
That's
it was like 9:30 or 10 on a Saturday morning, so that guy was probably asleep, and he apparently carried about his door. So
yeah. 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 Apparently you knocking on it could really damage it. But yeah, I mean, that's just the climate we live in. I mean, 50 years ago, you could knock on somebody's front door, complete stranger, they'd walk out and have a conversation with you. And that's just not the case anymore. That's not to say people are less friendly. It's just we interact in a different way. And I think you're right with the meetup stuff. I did want to ask you, when you mentioned that about meetups, when you say first timers, are you talking about people that are not Christians at all, that have never been exposed to Christianity, or are these people that are from the congregation that are first timers to the group? What do you mean when you say first timers?
okay, so first timer is an actual description in Meetup. So
Okay.
someone can be a part of your group, but they've never actually RSVP'd to an event. So
Okay.
this is their first time, at least I guess, RSVPing to any event, or at least first time RSVPing to this event.
Okay.
So I'd have to go through and look at the exact distinction, but
So they
anyway,
can be both, in other words.
these are new contacts for me. These are people I don't know who they are. They don't know me. These will be first time opportunities.
Right.
And at least with churches, good grief, those are super hard hard things to come about. Especially, I mean, if you look at the way churches are, usually like 80 to 90 something plus% of the reason someone is at a local church is because they had a friend or family member there.
Yeah, it's overwhelming. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that first off, that needs to be an understanding in evangelism. But what you want are these kind of opportunities to get to someone that is outside of your circle. And if you talk with people very much, usually it's someone that was outside of a circle that became a Christian, that then opened up a whole area, a whole group of people, because they've got a whole different section of friends and family members that are not connected, that they might be able to work with them as well.
Yeah. So. That's the story at Hillside. We have a family here who's here because, many years ago, that it was somebody's wife. Hold on, was it? It was a woman converted her husband when they got married, and then he converted his sister, who converted her husband, and then the entire family just kind of folded underneath. So, one convert ended up bringing up about 7 or 8 converts, and I think you're right. Evangelism flows best when it flows through relationships. And I think if you can harness technology and things like Meetup to establish these kind of connections, somebody's going to it and they say, hey, you should come too. I think that's a great idea. It's actually something I hadn't really thought about doing, which is hosting these kind of virtual Bible studies for the community. Are these, everybody that's in it, are these geographic specific? Like, are they just from the Hixson, Tennessee area, or is it open? Like, could I join your Meetup tonight if I knew about it, or do they put an emphasis on local advertising, or what's the story there?
So the way the Chattanooga Bible study would work is you would look for Bible studies in Chattanooga. Okay. And you look up for meetups in your area. Okay. So that's one reason I'm okay with it being a general thing, because I know there's been some privacy issues and all of that kind of thing. But with this, I can sit there and I can look at the actual list of people that RSVP'd through the group itself. And then I can go through and say, hey, this is the person that RSVP'd, and let them in. Right. So you just kind of have to have some type of security within that. But yeah, that does seem to it does seem to be more localized. So in your case, I mean, I might message some other people in other churches if they want to. And it's perfectly fine for them to do that. So
that's not your focus.
Conversation. Do what?
That's not your focus, though.
Yeah. I mean, I'm definitely fine with doing that. In that conversation I had with my friend, he had a guy that was over somewhere in Europe, somewhere over in that area, that was apparently watching their meetup right before he went to bed. And but I'm fine with that. I mean, it's just, you just have to realize just the nature of meetup is it's awkward. It's just a different deal, because you're in the community. I mean, you'll have somebody randomly come up. You've never met them. They've never met you. And you're trying to, what's bringing you together is the Bible. And so it's really big in those type of studies to try to have connection with them, like to bring them into the conversation, like to have some interaction with them after, those kind of things, to try to kind of build that. And anyway, it's definitely a different deal, and lowering your expectations, just trying to realize you're planting a seed,
Right.
and it may take a while for that seed to germinate and grow, and you don't know what's going to happen with it.
Right.
So,
And it does take multiple touches. That's something that's, I think you did a sermon on it one time. I think you talked about John 4, about how you sow and another reaps, and you're reaping for those things you didn't sow, and having that patience and understanding that, the days of the opportunities that you're going to have where somebody is introduced to the gospel and then you convert them that night, those are great when they happen, but you can't rely on those as the basis for your confidence. So when you reach outside of that and say, okay, I'm planting a seed that I can build on next week and that I can build on the week after that. And that's something I know people that, both of us know the church in Mauriceville with Chris Epler, and the church there has been doing, that type of stuff a long time, where they meet with somebody for multiple weeks, and they have several Bible studies over the course of multiple weeks. And I think that's the right attitude to have. I think Meetup is an interesting idea. That's something I'd always heard of, but I never really implemented. So I think that's something that a lot of churches can use, and especially if you can do it digitally, because a lot of people may feel hesitant about saying, I don't want to necessarily walk into a Bible study where I don't know everybody, but I don't mind meeting digitally with them. And I think that's the benefit of using Zoom right now, which is kind of where I wanted to spend the rest of our time this morning. But I think when you use Zoom to kind of bridge that gap, because if you think about somebody meeting in person, they have to make plans for it. They have to wonder, what do I need to bring? How do I need to dress? Do I need to bring money for food? Are they going to be offended when I'm drinking my Slurpee right in front of them? Like, there's a whole bunch of considerations. But with Zoom, you can actually be invisible. And I think that's one of the benefits of it, is you can have this kind of first touch, that first interaction, with very little commitment on somebody's end. And I know you had mentioned to me several weeks ago that once this coronavirus thing hit, that you were starting to move some of your Bible studies online to Zoom. And you do something interesting. Y'all do what's called, is it daily Bible readings or virtual Bible readings? Could you talk a little bit about digital reading group? Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about that and just explain what y'all do in, a few seconds for because I had never heard of it before. And I think that's something a lot of churches can do that would benefit.
Yeah. So there's a combination of things. A few years ago, I decided to actually sit down and read the Bible in a year. And
what a novelty for a preacher.
Well, so it is kind of bizarre how many people could actually teach from the Bible, but they haven't ever actually read it all.
Yeah.
It's funny. One of our guys was talking about the Bible, and he was comparing it to Darwin's his main book was, and he said that
Origin of Species.
Origin of Species. Yeah. Thank you. And he said these are the two books that everybody talks about. These are the two books that everybody talks about, but nobody's ever read.
That's very true. I actually haven't read Origin of Species either, but I remember finding myself one time quoting something, maybe even in a sermon, that I had heard. I was like, oh, or maybe it's Origin of Man. I can't remember what it is specifically. And somebody called me out on it later that week. They're like, yeah, that's actually not in there at all. But if you're gonna quote something, or if you're gonna bring up something, you at least need to know what you're talking about, at least a little bit. Quote the right source. So I something we take for granted.
Yeah. So as that relates to reading, not that I didn't know, not that what I was saying wasn't true or that kind of thing, but sometimes you go through and you read and you're like, oh, like I understand this much better in context, and sometimes it does correct things. So reading has become an emphasis of mine, and really Mark Roberts has been big encouragement in that. I used his reading plan the first year I did it, and had a friend of mine just say, you know what, you need to sit your tail down and read. And he gave me a challenge. And so reading became a really big deal.
Yeah.
And so as I've kind of started down that process, what I've started to realize more and more is that these letters are not meant to be chopped up and thrown into a blender and put into a sermon every week. Right. Not that there's anything wrong with that.
That is a danger.
It's pretty much that.
Yeah.
And you read the sermons in the book of Acts. There's a lot that are that way. Mm-hmm. But the way that they're doing that is they understand that the scripture stands on its own, and it needs to be read on its own. And then they're tying into that. Right. And then saying, here's something, and then specifically applying it. Yeah. So as it relates to reading, one of the members here is really good about reading whole books at a time. Mm-hmm. And I guess I've been influenced and shaped with some of that about just sitting down, read the whole book at a time. and I want to do more of that. But it's kind of funny, actually. One of the first times whenever I was younger, I was talking, you and I both know Randy, right?
Mm.
It's a pretty funny story relating to this, but Randy was trying to help me with Galatians.
You're talking about Randy Hartsbarger, right?
Yeah.
All right, just want to make sure we're on the same page, but yeah. Yeah.
So
every preacher has a tell. His is just funny. Yeah.
Exactly. So he said, okay, you should sit down and read the whole book. And I was like, the whole book? Of course, I was like a teenager at the time, but it seemed like a lot. Like, you want me to read the whole book? Yeah. And yet that's been something that I've actually started to get to, is read the whole book, because themes that start in the beginning, they're usually tied at the end, and there's a whole thought. And again, approaching the Bible as it's a bunch of letters that need to be read. Mm-hmm. So anyway, all of that kind of background then led to one of our members starting a reading group. Mm-hmm. He does this on Monday night, and he'd been doing this last year. Everything was going good. And it's basically sit down, read a whole letter. And I mean, it's as much as they read like the whole book of Romans in one setting. Just for example, as a church, last week in my reading group, we started another one later. We read the whole book of Hebrews.
Those books surprisingly don't take a long time to read. Isn't it something like Romans maybe is like 35 minutes or something like that?
It wouldn't surprise me. It might be 45. We read the whole book of Hebrews with a little bit of delay in probably 45 or 50. Yeah. Like you think it's going to take a long time. It really doesn't. Yeah. And if you understand, these letters are meant to be read. In fact, there's plenty of times where Paul told Timothy, give attention to the public reading of Scripture. Right. Like, read the letters. Yeah. And there's plenty of times he wrote and said, hey, you're getting this letter, make sure it's read to every single one. There's a charge to read it. And it's not just read sections.
Yeah, I remember one of the most eye-opening things, I was in a Bible study, ironically, with Mark Roberts, who was teaching on how to look at apocalyptic literature, which I know he's surprisingly, he's a very engaging person, but he's also a force to be reckoned with when it comes to apocalyptic literature. He really, really knows the stuff. But anyways, he made the comment that, sometimes we break Revelation apart and look at the seals and, the bowls and stuff. We're like, oh, this applies to all these different things. And that notwithstanding, Revelation was meant to be read as a letter to these 7 churches of Asia. And so if you put yourself in the position of somebody who's hearing it, then you view it a different way. If you just read it, or even if you use an audio Bible to have it read to you, if you read it all in one sitting, as opposed to, taking it apart, because that book can absolutely be abused if you rip it apart like that.
Sure. Yeah. And it only takes probably an hour and a half to read Revelation or have it read to you.
And it takes another 30 years to understand it.
Actually, but if you it makes much more sense though if you have it all read. And there's actually a blessing in it. He reads it, and there's a blessing if you hear it and then do it. It's kind of the idea. But so anyway, all of that was kind of the formation of these groups. Mm-hmm. And so you'd think, hey, coronavirus, we can't do that, right? Mm-hmm. Actually, we've used Zoom for that. And so he had Zoom on his, I've used Zoom on mine. Mm-hmm. And the amount of people that are coming has actually gone up. Yeah. And we've been able to reach out to some people that are like isolated. They can't get out. So on mine, for example, there's a lady, I think she's 85, 87, showing really good health, but she's not getting out. Yeah. And then there's another man, he's in his 70s or so. He's not getting out.
That's a target demographic for this coronavirus stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so these are people that are able to get out and to participate in that kind of way. And so one thing that I'm going to try to do as well, thinking about evangelism in this, a lot of people are in these next door apps, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And so the reason I started my home study here, my reading group, is so that I can reach my neighborhood. Yeah. That is the purpose. And then it immediately the coronavirus hit it. But what I'm planning on doing actually later today is going through and putting my Zoom link on next door and trying to invite my neighbors. Because I've had people show interest, but it all kind of, they didn't come in part because of all the virus stuff. Mm-hmm. So that's another way that you could use this with evangelism. It's kind of like the meetup thing, but it's kind of also a different thing. And those are, the one reason I like the meetup studies, and also one reason I like the reading groups, is I try to keep both of those really low to the ground. We are reading it and we're talking about it. This is not a big, deep theological discussion. This is see and observe, just read it, observe it.
Yeah.
Let's have some discussion over it. And
Yeah.
it goes great. The preparation's really minimal for someone that really has a ton of like I've got so many things going on. I mean, it's hop on, read, and just talk about it.
Yeah.
Is how I try to go and try to do those types of things. And it's been great.
Do you link the Zoom? Is the Zoom and your Meetup class, is that the same thing, or do you have your Meetup class that you're doing tonight and then you do a Zoom class with your neighborhood separate, or are those the same thing?
Those are separate. So tonight I'll be doing my Meetup, and then on Thursday night I'll be doing my reading group. Okay. And so like last night though, our other member that has his reading group, he does his on Monday, and they're doing Psalms right now. Okay. And so they're working through it, but he has the same response. More people able to participate. Those are primarily for the church, right? Yeah. But still you're having more participation, and people that weren't coming are now coming. Right. And I think that speaks to the ease. Right. Just because we're kind of a spread out church in some ways, but it's an ease of being able to click in. And we were talking some before. I told you about Caleb Churchill up there in New York.
That was good work in New York City.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much driving and all that kind of thing. They don't even have a midweek service, from what I understand. But what they do is they have a Zoom Meetup, something like that, almost every single day of the week that somebody can hop into.
Yeah, and I think that's really valuable. And you were talking beforehand too about the fact that, if you have let's say you have your Zoom Meetup study at 7:00, you may click it on at 6:45 or 6:30 and let people kind of interact beforehand, then leave it going for 30 minutes afterwards. That way people, because and not to say that this is necessarily why we come together, but obviously it's a part of it from Hebrews chapter 10, 24 and 25. But one of the best things about assembling together is that foyer time where you get to interact with each other and talk with each other. And so seeing it as interacting and being able to talk and share each other's life. I mean, that's the point of verses 24 and 25 of Hebrews 10, is to how to stir one another up unto love and good works. And to see that interact over Zoom, it's interesting, but it's also I think an advantage we have. I mean, we do the same thing. We have a daily Bible study right now at Hillside every single morning at 9:00 with the members from church. And you'll see people stay on for 10, 15 minutes afterwards, showing their kids and asking how the day went and stuff like that. And it's a great way to keep that relationship alive without necessarily having to be together physically until we can be physically.
Yeah. So we kind of do the same thing. Yeah. We kind of usually chat for a little bit. So we also do our Bible studies, our Sunday morning class. We just started getting that going again. And then our Wednesday night class, the same thing. So we'll have some people log in, kind of chat a little bit before, go through a 45-minute class period, and then an hour. We've gone a little bit longer on Wednesday nights. And then we just open it up, 20, 15, however long, however many minutes we want to hang out after that. And so that's been really an interesting way. And I think what will happen for the church going forward is that we will probably have some level of streaming that comes out of this, where we weren't streaming video before. I think that will be kind of one way that this comes, because just with the virus thing, I think it's going to be a gradual transition for people to come in, and we want to try to include them in the process. Yeah. But then it's also been something that we've had interaction on our Facebook page, where we didn't stream services before. But because of Zoom, now we're able to just take that link and put it straight on our webpage or our Facebook page and have some of the members share it or whatever. And we've had more traction because of that. And so that's something, again, that we hadn't done before, but I think will be different post coronavirus. Yeah. But yeah, it's just, you just try to figure out the best ways you can go about and do that. And, everybody's trying to kind of figure it out, but that's just the way difficult circumstances work, is usually there's a blessing in there. There's a challenge to a mindset. There's a different way of looking at it, that you actually are different and better because you've gone through it. Yeah.
Look as an opportunity for growth and how to sharpen your skills. I think sometimes we get into a lull where we, every week is exactly the same. And times like this, at the very least, shake us up to realize what, possibilities are out there and what we could be doing. And, I think we're kind of in a similar situation as y'all. And I think a lot of churches that are streaming their services are picking up people either from the community or maybe from churches that aren't streaming. Because there's lots of churches that don't have a located preacher, or that don't have, any kind of technology, or don't have the resources, especially really rural congregations, maybe can't stream services from their church building. So some of those members are jumping in on ours. Some of them are, following our Bible classes. We just opened up our Bible classes on Wednesday and Sunday to people. And, it is, I think, seeing that moving forward, using technology as an integral part of your evangelism plan moving forward, I think that's really important. And you're right. It's something that a lot of churches haven't really thought about. But I think even when you talk about Meetup and Zoom, these are things you can be doing years down the road, not just right now, for sure.
Yeah. I got a baby trying to knock on the door. Hey, go back to mama.
Do you want me to cut this part out of it?
Sure. It doesn't matter. He's good now. He went on back.
Okay.
Yeah, just wanted to say hi. But no, I think you're right. So in every problem you have the seed of the solution, right? Mm-hmm. And that's been that's not mine originally, but mm-hmm. I think one thing that will be good out of this is a lot of churches now, with the advent of vehicles and all that kind of thing, they're just way more spread out than they used to be. And being here has been especially brought to my attention. Yeah. And I think honestly, things like this will help to have some connection, because when I think about some of the people that are coming to some of these reading groups, there are people that they're not there for Bible class. Yeah. They're not there for Wednesday night services. Mm-hmm. Or it's really hard for them because of the drive or stuff with their kids or health concerns or whatever. And they can click in and they just sit there and listen. Yeah. And, that's way, well, I think digital communication is definitely no replacement for physical interaction, right? It never will be. And it's just not. Right. But that doesn't mean you can't use it though to have connection that you wouldn't have at all. Right. So, right now, I haven't seen you in too long, right? But I'm still seeing you. We're still having some level of communication and interaction, and that kind of thing. So it's just trying to have a solution for the problems. Right. And this could be an opportunity going forward.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think, it's, you mentioned it's not a solution, or it's not a replacement for services, and definitely not. It's absolutely not a replacement for services. But what it is it's an addition to it. If you keep your Sunday morning worship, Sunday night worship, Wednesday night Bible class, to have a Zoom class on Monday night doesn't take away from either of those. And just to stream your Wednesday night or your Sunday services doesn't take away from those. It just it takes that reach that was just confined here, and it brings it out a little bit more. So I think that's a good point. It's never going to be a replacement, but it can certainly be an addition, and it doesn't take away anything from it. So why wouldn't we embrace some of these things to try and reach more people with the gospel? I think that's a good point to bring up.
Well, and one thing we also talked about that, so with our services, we kind of do it a little bit different. Mm-hmm. On Sunday morning, we have the interaction kind of for your time after Bible class before the service. But one thing that we use the webinar mode on Zoom. Now that's an additional cost, and the reason we have that is because we have an actual IT person that works at the company, and so he uses his account, which is great. But one thing though that I think needs to be thought about is not just taking these Zooms. Like right now, you could put this on Facebook, right? And you could have interactions and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. But those webinar type things can be also streamed, and it's just another thing that I wouldn't usually think about, but you can do webinar type discussions and that kind of thing and still have interaction with nobody interrupting you. Yeah. And you can save that and put it on your website. Yeah. So I talked about this with one of the members here about going through and doing something maybe on like the story of the Bible, right? Yeah. What's that? And you could even do it on like what's the purpose of Matthew? What's the purpose of Revelation? And you could go through and have some smaller interactions like that, and take those and then like, hey, if you want kind of a walkthrough, there you go. And you can put your slides into it. You can have multiple panelists that go back and forth. You and I could do something like that over Revelation or something. And and we've kind of talked a little bit about that, but those are things where, again, the hardest climate to change is the climate of the human mind.
Right.
We're just limited by our lack of imagination and creativity.
Yeah.
And if we can just not get upset because we've been doing it wrong, however long, or we've not done it as effectively as we could, but think, hey, I want to do this in any way possible that I can, and just be open to looking at things and realizing I get in a rut of thinking a certain way, and trying to get out of that. That's always going to be great, because that's what happens with churches. We get stuck. We get in, here's, your normal 4 songs and, Lord's Supper and all of those. And again, you understand the commands, right? But then you get into the rut and the routine that, I think honestly this might be good for churches. They can go back and think, how can we do this differently? What have we learned from this? And try to be better churches and more creative and interactive.
Right. I think anything that forces us out of our comfort zone scripturally and spiritually, I think is a good thing for us to be involved in. Because like you said, even not just as churches, but even as individuals, we get into a rut and we think, okay, this is how my week's going to go. This is how my month's going to go. So breaking out of that comfort zone, I think, is really handy. So.
Sure.
All right. Well, this has been a really good conversation. We're going to have to end it here, but I appreciate you coming on and spending some time with me. I think this has given a lot for us given us a lot to chew on, especially in the idea of, using these digital groups to interact with your churches, interact with your local churches, and interact with people from the community. So I appreciate you taking time out of your day. I know you've got 3 kids that are upstairs or in the other room waiting for you, so I'll let you get going.
I really appreciate you having me. And I will say to any of the viewers, if you haven't sat down and read an entire book of the Bible in one sitting, please do that. Yes. It is transformational, and do that in these groups. It's great. So
maybe start with Philemon and then go to Revelation.
Start with something easy like an Obadiah.
Even Obadiah is kind of tough, but you can start with that one too. Spend 1 minute reading it and 10 minutes chewing on it.
Yeah, exactly. All right, buddy.
Well,
I really appreciate it. We'll holler at you later.
Thank you, man. See you.